We are live once again with our half-hour analysis of what is going wrong with the war against Iran. I would say what's going right, but it seems that only Russia's outcomes are the things that's going right at the moment or going in their favor. Even that is, open to debate. I am delighted to be joined by my co-host David Dubato, who will give a bit of rundown of his various platforms in a second. If you're not following his output, I strongly recommend you do, because he foresaw quite a lot of this stuff. Also, his experience in Iraq, I think, is very pertinent to what is happening now in Iran and these strategic failures that we're seeing unfolding. David, welcome.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of The Dictators, which we're now doing every day at about the same time. It's a little shorter format than we've been doing, but it's every day. So we're quite happy with that. And as Jonathan said, I've got my own YouTube channel called No Delusion Zone, as well as a Substack called Protecting the Republic. And I'll put that up now. And there it is. protectingtherepublic.com and the No Delusion Zone on YouTube. So I encourage you all to take a look at that and hopefully become subscribers. There's so much to talk about, as there always is. Where do you want to start with this? I told you off air an incident I had.
There's so much. We'll do the incident in a minute, because I think strategy, CENTCOM, all that stuff is super important in a minute, and then Tulsi Gabbard and the fish rotting for the head, all that kind of stuff will come to that. But let's deal with what happened overnight, because we seem to have Israel not unilaterally, because I doubt very much whether they're taking any real unilateral action here. Things probably are channeled through the US, and therefore they were given a tentative nod to go ahead and do it. But they've hit an absolutely critical LNG facility that is owned, part controlled by Iran. Iran has lashed out and hit the Qatari part of that, which is the largest LNG processing terminal in the world. Parts of it are now on fire after being hit, the Iranian part and the Qatari part. This is getting very bad very quickly, and it seems to me the implications are huge, perhaps not even really picked up, which is that if the US is going to counter this, every time they hit Iran, there is going to be a blow back. That blow is not necessarily going to be military, but it's going to be a huge economic punch against the global economy and against US's, let's say, allies, inverted commas. In this case, their Middle Eastern allies don't have much choice because they're stuck in the region. They can't go anywhere. They can't stick their heads in the sand like European ostriches. But it looks like Iran has some extraordinary leverage there to hurt the global economy, to hurt the region, to hurt Donald Trump. Therefore, to fix this, either it's going to be a messy withdrawal and a humiliating withdrawal, or somehow they're going to have to win this war against Iran. But that suggests a very expensive and protracted campaign, and very risky as well. Not a given that the US could even win a large-scale fight against Iran.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know you're going to ask me this a little later. How do you see this war ending? How do you see, or what do you see Donald Trump doing to try to save some face in this? Where is this going to go?
I don't see an endgame for it, because none has really been planned. I think the idea, and actually Israel may have actually believed this as well, although they're quite clearly delighted just to be able to take out their enemy and keep punching them. The anticipated outcome was, when faced with the Iranian Hydra, and it is a vile government, it does sponsor terrorism around the world. We know all this stuff. We're not denying that stuff. But if you're going to take out the Hydra, you need to lop off every single one of those heads straight away. You need to kill that beast so that it doesn't come back at you. Well, unfortunately, they got many of them, but they've left many of those heads intact. Those have sprouted new and more malignant heads in their place. The people who have replaced the leaders that were killed turn out to be more conservative, more committed, and now, of course, they have a grudge, because many of their family members have been killed in the operation so far. And they know Iran is going to be punished economically no matter what. They've now got nothing to lose. We've created here a cornered rat. And frankly, I don't see a clean outcome to any of this. It's either humiliating withdrawal with no guarantee that the pain doesn't go away, or a massively scaled up military effort, but without allies taking part, which again will be protracted and painful, and where the outcome is by no means assured.
Well, do you believe, as of course the American propaganda, if you will, the White House is putting out, that we've destroyed, almost all of the weapons platforms, the missiles, all of the ability of Iran to strike back, that they are just there laying naked for the United States to bomb into oblivion? Do you believe that Iran has almost no ability to not only defend itself, but to strike out at others? Are we going to see the war end because they're just out of ammunition and missiles and bullets and drones?
Well, they won't be out of ammunition because, as we've seen in fighting Russia, if they're smart, and they were preparing for this a lot longer, I think, than the United States was preparing for it, they would not have centralized all their ammo dumps. They would have not have centralized everything. They would have distributed, bases for small arms and all sorts of stuff. So no, when Donald Trump says their military is 100% degraded, it may be that the larger, more expensive platforms are substantially degraded, but that's the equipment that would have been used to fight the last war, the 20th century war. What Iran has been doing is building the capability to fight an insurgent war, to suppress its own people. Therefore, they would have that sort of capability to mount lethality spread throughout the society. They're geared up to fight internal dissent. Well, it's not a huge flip to then fight external penetration as well. And as we've seen from the drones, well, clearly their stocks have not been decimated. Their production capacity has probably not been destroyed, because if they're smart, they would have decentralized quite a lot of that, as Ukrainians have done with their own production facilities. And they will potentially have partners still producing those at scale. No, I mean, they've not been degraded at all. If we look at the asymmetric war that is now being fought, well, I think they're fully capable. So, yeah, you can wipe out the traditional military stuff. That might not help you one jot to win the asymmetric war.
Well, let's cut through the nonsense of the Pentagon and the White House. Iran's not going to run out of the ability to not only defend itself, but to lash out at its neighbors. Both China, Russia, and very possibly North Korea are going to supply Iran with all the spare parts that they need, the engines, the components, as well as very definitely, I believe, many drones, even ballistic missiles. Basically, Russia, China, and as I said, probably North Korea are going to supply Iran with whatever they need. Having said that, as you just mentioned, Iran's been preparing for this for decades, at least 40 years. They have hidden away many of their assets. When I say assets, I mean drones, of course, but many other weapons platforms underground. And contrary to what the White House may say, we don't know where they are. At least we don't know where most of them are. So it's not a matter of using bunker busting bombs, which we do have, although not in very large numbers. It's a matter of not knowing where they are. You can't just bomb the entire nation of Iran, which is about 3 times the size of Texas, and expect to do any damage to the weapons that they've got squirreled away underground. And as I said, you've got 3 other nations that are going to supply them for as long as they need. Not only that, the government of Iran, which is degraded, as you said, and as the White House said, Israel and the United States have decapitated the government. So what? It is like a hydra. They will replace and already have replaced their leaders as they are taken down. They have prepared for this. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps is in firm control of the country. And I mean firm control. We're talking every police station, almost every corner, every school, every university, all the major businesses. They're in control. You can kill every one of the senior government leaders, and the infrastructure of Iran is really not going to change. The IRSG are going to, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps is going to be in firm control. And let me tell you something, folks. They don't like America. They are rabid anti-American and anti-Israeli folks. They are the extreme far right nationalists in Iran, and they control the country. And in addition to the about 150 or 80,000 of them, there's about 500,000 or 600,000 armed militia that works in concert with them, that are probably working right now on the streets, that have been activated. So I'm sorry, this is a long-term problem, and I agree with you, Jonathan. I asked you first. I don't know how this is going to end. I know that Donald Trump has very, very thin skin. He would never accept defeat, but I don't know how he's going to spin this into a victory either. So I really don't know, except to say that this is going to go on for quite a while. It's going to devastate not only the Western, but the worldwide economy.
Yes, I mean, it was already in a jittery state, given the capricious trade sort of stuff that was going on, sort of various, trade tariffs being imposed and then removed and then imposed and then hiked, and the threats made. And if you're not nice to Donnie, he's going to double your tariffs, etc., as he threatened Spain last week. We're not going to buy anything from Spain. So it was already jittery, absolutely. It seems that the global economy is being buoyed up by the AI investment, which is looking more and more like a kind of bubble. Reminds me very much of the first .com crash. That's not to say that the technology won't morph into a second generation and a second generation of entities, companies, business applications. But at the moment, very few companies are making money off AI, or they're struggling to, find how they can physically make money. Yes, they're saving money potentially. They're maybe increasing their bottom line by cutting staff, etc. But all this is going to have a shock impact on the economy, as there are fewer jobs at the sort of entry level, the executive kind of level. And the money making high-end applications of AI are still working their way through the system. So we could get a double shock: AI shock, oil shock.
Well, right now, as you're recovering there, I just wanted to say that it's no surprise that right now Europe is again reeling from the shock of this for both oil and natural gas. They are scared blankless about what it's going to do to their economies right now. They went through this, not too long ago, with cutting off or weaning themselves from Russian oil and gas, which they still haven't done completely. And now the shock from the Iranian war is going to hit Europe very, very hard, as well as other nations. But that's a huge problem for Europe right now. Agree? Not sure if you can...
Oh, I'm muted there. LNG is going to be a big one, isn't it? Because I mean, I need to get some experts on to talk about this, but the fact that the largest LNG processing facility in the world is now potentially partly offline, or could be fully offline, and the threat hasn't gone away, this is deeply damaging. This is perhaps where Russia might really benefit here, because okay, their pipelines, Nord Stream, are not usable, as it were, but this could really benefit them if Europe is absolutely desperate. Then the morality of supporting Ukraine, which at certain times is looking hypocritical enough anyway, that could be suspended by Europe if push comes to shove. Now, we're coming out of winter, so the demand for energy is lower, but of course there is industrial demand, and this is extremely dangerous. And as I say, in asymmetric warfare, what Iran is doing is it is displaying a tactic which Russia has used throughout the war against Ukraine. They've used it against Ukraine's allies. Ukraine has tried not to play that game so much, but they've used this idea of escalation dominance, which is no matter how much the allies of Ukraine pile in and support Ukraine, you just need to be one step ahead, doing things that are unpredictable, remaining scary, beyond your actual capability, and punching back harder than you're punched. If you can retain the escalation dominance, then you're going to make this incredibly costly. This is what Iran is doing, and it is succeeding, no matter what people may comment about its lack of capabilities or how much it's lost. They have the escalation dominance. Every time US and Israel is going to punch them, they can punch back 10 times harder at the moment, until the US either decides to not play that game at all and withdraw, or decide that it has to attain escalation dominance. Well, yeah, because the infrastructure and the skills have not been put in place to guard against Shaheeds and Iranian drone capacity. Well, I'm afraid the US is incredibly vulnerable, and its allies are vulnerable, and they know that the US has gone into this with inadequate protections for their infrastructure. Now, Donnie can stand up and say, well, no one foresaw X, Y, and Z. Well, the fact is many people did foresee it. And the fact is you've had 4 years of war in Ukraine that demonstrates exactly what's going to happen in this asymmetric struggle for dominance. And frankly, the capability to counter it has been developed in Ukraine and ignored.
Well, yesterday we discussed quite a bit, I think, about how Russia may benefit from this. There's folks on both sides saying that Russia really is not going to benefit from this. Others are saying, yeah, they already are. I'm in the camp that say, yes, they already are. And one of the benefits for Russia is, of course, the increased oil price, which I think as we speak now is about $114 or $15 per barrel. It may be slightly higher or lower than that right now, but it's right around there. The other thing is that the Western world, anyway, is ignoring what's going on in Ukraine. This is great news for Russia. And not only are they ignoring Ukraine, NATO, the European countries, because they are scared blankless about what may happen to their economies because of what we're discussing here with natural gas, with gas and oil, are going to, I hate to say this, they're going to relax, to cut back on their support for Ukraine. This is a tragedy. This is a disgrace. But I believe that that's going to be one of the outcomes, one of the side effects of what's going on here. So, of course, Russia benefits from that. I wanted to talk about a point you just made, though, about America not preparing for this, not even having enough drones or counter drone systems before this all started. I do want to say that not all the American military and intelligence community folks were blind or blindsided or went into the war in Iran just, stupid. They didn't know what was going on. Not true. I happen to believe that the vast majority of the senior military officials, the generals and the planners, and as well as the senior people in our intelligence community, were just apoplectic about what the plans were, or I shouldn't say lack of plans for going into this war with Iran. They knew the risks. They knew the dangers. They knew the lack of planning that was going on. And I'm sure they told everyone above them that this is a very bad idea. But it went on anyway because they follow orders. You and I had discussed this off air. The proper thing to do, in my opinion, would be if these senior military and intelligence officials felt so strongly that this was a very bad idea, that this was a national security disaster in the making, I believe they should have done the right thing and said, no, sir, respectfully, I cannot do that. I resign. If you had hundreds or thousands of the most senior military and intelligence officials resigning over this disaster that is the Iranian war, that would have a pretty big effect. I understand they didn't do it. They want their pensions, their paychecks, and all the rest of it. I get that. But Jonathan, nothing short of mass resignations by the most senior military and intelligence officials, or all government officials that have a spine, is going to change not only this war, but the direction that my country is taking. I'm sorry, but that's what it's going to take. And I don't foresee that happening in the near future.
And this, we're not going to really touch on the authoritarian slide in the US, but it's similar there until there's mass dissension throughout the administration, throughout the DOJ, then, the impunity that is being displayed will continue. Now, we were going to talk a little bit. Well, let's touch on that because this is a key topic. I earlier compared this a little bit to late stage Soviet decline. People go, "Wow, in a second, the US and the Soviet Union materially, there's no comparison there." And yeah, if you're going to focus purely on the capitalistic and material element of it, then sure, you've got a point. However, if we look at it from the point of an extremely bureaucratic society, or a society that's being clogged by bureaucracy and a very hierarchical sort of perception of things, as you say, not necessarily feeling you can pass your opinion up the chain, not necessarily having the agency to change things, a lot of people feeling that they no longer had the agency they once had, therefore everything is someone else's problem. And the other big one, the gerontocracy. This is where your ruling class, who are, like the dragon in The Hobbit, sitting on their pile of gold, trying to prevent anyone from kind of coming in. Smaug, yeah. This is a problem because that kind of system becomes hierarchical. It stifles innovation. It stifles freedom. It stifles problem solving. It starts to repel people at every level. So they turn to more extremist measures, populist politicians. This isn't a pure Trump problem. This systemic gerontocracy and proto-oligarchy, this brought down the Soviet Union. I thought they never really fixed it because it's reemerged in modern Russia. This seems to be bringing the American empire down as well. The lack of fluidity and upward mobility, the lack, I dare say, of freedom, which is the lifeblood of the American system. It's become very sclerotic. The blood has become very thick. It needs to be thinned out. Does this sound simplistic, or do you think there's a real problem here? And again, it's not a Trump problem. This is now a problem of several decades.
Well, and of course, it doesn't help that Trump and his minions threaten the Congress people and senators and their families for just disagreeing with him. That tends to get people's attention and tends to encourage them not to vote against him when he puts up pretty much anything before Congress, or says pretty much anything, or signs another insane executive order. We talked about something else off air, and I think it dovetails exactly into what you're talking about: passing the buck, the end of the Soviet Union, lack of agency of people who feel they can do anything. I think the McDill story is in order here now, if you don't disagree, because this, I think, perfectly illustrates passing the buck. No officials wanting to get involved in what I absolutely believe is a catastrophe, a major, major problem in this country. And so I'll just get into it. I spoke to Jonathan about this off air, and I'll just try to run through it as fast as I can. But folks, listen to this, because this is something that I just can't get anybody's attention here in the States. And I'm talking officials, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, or even the media. A few years ago, just before the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I had some folks visiting from Russia before there was the visa restrictions and all the very negative things were happening. I do know people in Russia. So they came here to visit. And at that time, I had to renew my military ID, my retired military ID. And that is done in the area where I live, which is Florida and McDill Air Force Base. Many of you may be familiar with that name. Why? It is the headquarters of CENTCOM, the American Central Command. That's the folks that are now actually running the war in Iran, but run many, many wars. It's Central Command. To briefly talk about this, when I went through the gate with these Russians, there were actually three of them. No, two of them. And one was a young man of draft age who had a black knapsack on his back in my car. The gate guard at the main gate to McDill Air Force Base asked me for my ID. He scanned it and said, okay, you're good to go. He did not even look at nor speak to the two Russians that were in the car. He did not search in my car, under my car, or around my car. We drove in. We parked. I then wanted to give a tour of the base to these two Russians who were legally here on visas. And we freely walked around McDill Air Force Base for 3 to 4 hours, taking many, many photos. And again, remember, young draft age male Russian with a big black backpack on his back. We walked right up to the CENTCOM headquarters building, took some more photos, even knocked on the back door. Fortunately, nobody answered. I went up to the Office of Special Investigations, Air Force, OSI, took some photos of that. That's not only their law enforcement, it's their counterintelligence agency in the Air Force. Again, we walked around for hours, took photos, blah, blah, blah. Nobody approached us. Nobody challenged us. We even walked into a hangar right off the flight line and took some photos. Anyway, fast forward to now, today. We had to go there, or I had to go there again to renew an ID. So we drove to McDill, and there was another Russian national in my car, but American citizen. However, we went to the gate. Again, this is now. They scanned my ID, good to go. Didn't talk to anybody in my car, didn't search my car. We went right through. Why am I telling you this about today? Because the day before we went, this was Tuesday, 2 days ago, and the day after we went, there were suspicious bags found, material at the main gate where we just were. McDill had to shut down their main gate for 6 to 8 hours while they investigated those unknown, the contents of these bags. This was the day before I went and the day after I went. So I'm there in the middle of these two massive security searches, and they still did not have increased security when I was there. This was after they had found this package that they closed down the gates for almost a whole day. And in the middle of a war that we're having with Iran. And by the way, Jonathan, that KC-135 that crashed in Iraq and killed 6 American airmen was based at McDill. Okay, just as further information. So I am staggered. I am flabbergasted that this happens. And just to close up on this, when this happened about 5 years ago for the first time, and I was just floored by the lack of security and the freedom of movement we had, I called the FBI field office in Tampa. I called the Tampa Police Department. I called the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Nobody was interested. They didn't think it was any big deal. I was stunned. I called the local newspaper. I called then the New York Times to tell them what had been going on. I, as some people know, am retired Army counterintelligence agent. One of the things we did as counterintelligence agents was to do force protection, to survey military bases and recommend increased security measures. So I know a little bit about what security should be like at a U.S. military base. They didn't care who I was, what I said, or what had happened. I couldn't get law enforcement, the intelligence agencies, or the American media interested in this. And here we are, in the middle of a huge war with Iran, who I'm sure has sleeper cells here in the United States. There were credible security threats before and after I went to McDill, headquarters of CENTCOM, and nobody gives a shit about the security lapses at McDill. I'm frustrated. It has to do with what I think you said, Jonathan. People are passing the buck. Nobody wants to get involved, whether it's the FBI, the police, the media, politicians. Nobody wants to say, this may be a problem. We should probably look into that. It ain't happening. And I'm sorry, I am just stunned. I don't have a better word for it.
It is an all of society change. And there's a comment from Radical Bite in there that the UK is not necessarily dramatically better than that. There's a culture that's grown up that everything is going to be fixed by somebody else, and that we no longer, have a part or agency in the solutions that our society needs. And we've got to relearn that. Ukraine has that because they've never really believed in the capacity of government to solve all those problems anyway. So if you want a better life, a better society, well, you're going to have to do something about it. There's no magic wand. Let's turn to Tulsi Gabbard, because this is not something I paid a huge amount of attention to. But this is another extraordinary thing. We know who she is. She has always repeated Russian narratives verbatim. Her speeches, and indeed her address yesterday to a particular committee, could have easily been scripted in the Kremlin. It just literally could. But what's your take here? Because I think you are thinking there's something a bit more significant going on.
Well, she's one of my favorite people, as you know. We go back a long ways. We used to date in high school and all of that, but I don't want to talk about that today. I think what's more important is the fact that she did testify before a committee in Congress yesterday. And among all the other garbage that she said, pro-Kremlin, pro-Trump, and all that, the thing that stood out to me, and fortunately many here in America, not just me, was the fact when asked about the intelligence analysis that went into the planning or lack thereof for the military operation currently underway in Iran, she said that was not something that came from her, meaning her office, the Office of National Intelligence, for which she is the director, didn't really make any decisions based on intelligence analysis prior to President Trump making a decision to attack Iran. And when pushed further, she said that President Trump is now the primary analyst for all intelligence in the United States. He takes all the intelligence that we give him, and he makes the final decision on how to act on that intelligence. So here we have a person who is functionally illiterate, is in the throes of dementia, a convicted felon, and I could go on, and he is now the primary intelligence analyst in the United States intelligence and military communities. And based on that intelligence analysis, he makes the decisions as to whether to go to war or not, and presumably whether or not to actually use nuclear weapons and all the other assets of the American military. There's no words for this. There really aren't. I could say insane, ludicrous, dangerous, all of this, but that was the most important statement and confession that came out of all of her nonsensical testimony to me.
It's terrifying. It truly is terrifying. And anyone who's followed, her ramblings, will know that she's definitely got sources of information that are being fed directly from a Russian adjacent ecosystem. I also went back and looked at that director of security who actually condemned the war and resigned yesterday. Kent, I think is his surname. Joe Kent. His views on the war in Ukraine is just as vile as hers, it turns out. He's not just a full-on MAGA, because there are some MAGA adjacent. There are even some MAGAs who are pro-Ukraine. I mean, we find it difficult to see how the political arithmetic maps on that one, but there are people who profess to be MAGA who have some sympathy for Ukraine. This guy, however, vile, just repeating Kremlin nonsense end to end.
He is. I just wanted to throw in a Joe King tidbit here. He's a loathsome creature. So, yes, he was against the war in Iran, and I guess he said he resigned because he was so opposed to that. He was second to Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, in her office. He's a loathsome individual. He has been an anti-Semite forever. He is a pro-Kremlin guy. Yes, we should listen to him, I guess, because he is an intelligence analyst, but he's not a credible individual. He's another one of the MAGA who never met a conspiracy, a theory they don't like. So, we have to take everything he says with a grain of salt. Why he even said this and about the war and why he resigned, I don't know. I know he's got an ulterior motive. What it is, I don't know, but that's Joe King.
Yeah. And yeah, we speculated yesterday about whether he knows.
John King. King is his last name, but irrelevant.
And we speculated about whether he knows stuff that's going on. Well, to top this episode out, let's turn back to the idea that Trump has created a war for which it's very difficult to get an off-ramp. If he were to withdraw in a humiliating fashion, even he would struggle to pitch this and sell this as a victory. There's no guarantee that Iran wouldn't continue to punch US allies in the region in the face. There's no guarantee that Israel would say, job done. They are in the region. They know that they will not get another chance. This is a generational chance to destroy Iran, which has been something that for them has been decades in the making. For all those who would love to see regime change in Iran, is that even, on Israel's agenda? I'm sure they'd love to see that, but for them, it's far more important to have an Iran that is completely degraded and weakened. So, is Trump now trapped? Is he tied to Israel and its extreme approach to this? And are we likely in the coming days to see the same kind of risky strikes that Israel's been doing to not trigger regime change, which is a nice to have, but to completely degrade Iran as a regional and economic and military power, which I think is their objective?
There's no good off-ramp for Trump. There just isn't. It doesn't matter what he says, how he spins this, what he does. The best thing to do, of course, and I don't predict him doing this, is to declare victory and order all U.S. forces out of Iran and out of the region. Yes, he could do that. I don't see him doing that because, as I've said now several times, he has very thin skin. He won't do anything that he perceives shows weakness with him, that shows he's been defeated, that he's a loser to anybody. It doesn't matter what the reason is or the fact that he got himself into this. So I don't see him ordering U.S. forces out of Iran anytime soon. How far will he escalate? Jonathan, I'll be honest, I fear a lot. I fear that if he does send in the Marines to Cargo Island, which they're already on their way, and that doesn't work out so well, then I don't think it will. I do think there's a good chance that he'll deploy the 82nd Airborne to drop into Tehran and try to do something there. That's not going to work out too well either, I predict. And then what does he do? I don't know. Send in who knows who, more ground forces.
This is like a Benghazi on steroids, right? This is all the things that over the years he's pointed at Hillary and others and gone, yeah, you did that. Same as
oh yeah. Well, and again, it is a great Vietnam analogy, though. That's how we did get involved in Vietnam, and it did go incrementally like this for several years under Johnson. And then Nixon, but no, I don't see him pulling out any
Benghazi disaster. I mean, all the things that they've over the years accused the Democrats of being guilty of. He's doing everything, but times, 1,000.
How could he call himself the no war president now? How can MAGA call Trump the no war president, the man that they voted for not to get America into foreign entanglements? How can they look themselves in the mirror and say that, yes, we still support him? However, Jonathan, millions of them still do.
This is even though some of the podcast bros are peeling away, it's not that house hasn't collapsed yet.
No,
Samson, like he's blindly pushing at the columns. He's going to bring the house down, but It's not happened yet.
No, the emperor has no clothes, but the MAGA faithful, which include his cabinet and all those around him, are just, doing this. They don't want to admit the truth, but that's always been that way. It's worse now than ever. It's embarrassing to watch his cabinet and his sycophants, blindly applauding him when he's up there with dementia, not being able to even finish a sentence. And yet the MAGA faithful laugh at his stupid jokes. In everything he says. It's a cult. What can I say? And they're in the full throes of cult worship, and I don't see that ending anytime soon either.
But the level of absurdity, as I say, is reaching a point where it is comparable to the end state of the Soviet Empire,
Yes.
which imploded in on itself. There are some different dynamics here, but we're dealing with similar levels of absurdity. It's a paradise for satirists because you couldn't make this stuff up. It powers these conversations, but we'd rather we were living in normal times. Alas,
Really?
we're not. There'll be plenty to discuss tomorrow. We'll probably wrap it up at this point. Any last words from you before we wind this one to a close?
Unfortunately, I just see the situation in Iran getting worse before it gets better. I wish that NATO and Europe had more of a spine than they do. That goes for American politicians as well. But I don't see them doing that anytime soon either. So stay tuned. Let's gather here again and meet tomorrow because there's going to be a lot more going on. That's about it for me.
That's it. And we're going to touch upon Greenland later in the week or tomorrow. We can also touch upon Taiwan because there is some new alleged reporting of rather interesting, dare I say it, sort of logistics relating to boats, which could indicate some kind of blockade. Well, we're going to touch upon Taiwan tomorrow. And as to whether all this stuff kicks off, I had a conversation this morning with Ben Hodges that'll go live tonight. There are some interesting themes in there. So let's touch upon these kind of World War III themes, Taiwan, etc., in tomorrow's episode.
Okay, to all, auf Wiedersehen.